What's up, everybody? Wednesday night, 1 week away from free agency, and we've got a lot to talk about on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza, and I can't believe how quickly 2021 has flown by already. We're talking on the doorstep of free agency, a lot to get to tonight. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, John Sheeran. John, how you doing, bud?
I was just thinking that, man. Like February just flew by. Just a year ago, man. Just a year ago, we were doing a Wednesday show, and all of a sudden, Rudy Gobert rubbed his hands all over some mics, and then all of a sudden, the entire world collapsed. So it's been a year, man. It's been a month, and now, like you said, we're a week away. So I think we got some news to cover, though. Tonight.
We've got just a smidge. We're going to cover a lot of different news and happenings that has been happening around the NFL as it pertains to free agency, guys who have randomly hit the open market shortly before the onset of it, what the Bengals are doing, and we had a couple of big press conferences this week from a couple of the team figureheads. So we're going to talk about some news. We've got to state your case, hot take that we're gonna bring you tonight. And we've got a soundbite of the week, and then we're going to try and get you another free agency profile, time permitting. So we've got a lot to get to tonight. Let's roll right into it. If you're ready, John, let's start with some of these interesting names hitting free agency, be it by not or set to hit free agency, I guess, whether they're hitting immediate free agency or looks like they're going to hit free agency because they didn't get the franchise tag. You've got Kevin Zeitler. You've got Riley Reif. You've got, I'm going to probably miss a few. Curtis Samuel is set to hit free agency. He did not receive the tag. Joe Thuney did not receive the franchise tag, as was pretty expected. So, Kenny Golladay, we did a free agency preview on him a few weeks ago, and didn't get the franchise tag like we expected. So he's on the open market. I don't know, man. A lot of different names out there. I don't know if a few are jumping out at you right away, and especially some of those who you may not have expected to be on the open market.
Yeah, so I think 8 or 9. I think 9 was the official number for players who got the franchise tag. Like you said, Golladay was one that people were surprised that he didn't get the tag. Wide receiver and offensive guard, just a position that's extremely saturated. I know Jeremy Fowler noted this on Twitter. ESPN reporter Jeremy Fowler, he said there's 5 starters that were last year's starters at both of those positions that are either street free agents right now or are set to be free agents with the intent of playing somewhere else. Those are positions that the Bengals should be interested in. And this is just what happens. This is what was going to happen this year when the cap was officially placed at $182.5 million Wednesday morning. Teams, they need to get under the cap, or they need to get in a good space to re-sign the players that they need to re-sign. And that, unfortunately, it comes with cap casualties. And right now it seems like wide receiver and offensive line and maybe a couple of guys on defense, those are the positions, those are the spots that are seeing the most action in terms of guys hitting the market. And like we kind of predicted, it was going to benefit the Bengals because these are positions that they were going to target. They're positions of weakness, and now they have opportunities to kind of strike.
Shaq Barrett, a guy that the Cincinnati Bengals courted a couple of years ago. He's a guy who hit the open market, or is set to hit the open market. And, there are a number of guys now that were released, though. And I guess the conversation needs to probably transition here. I mean, do you think that the Bengals are going to start pouncing on some of these cut guys, waived guys before the actual true onset of free agency? Or do you think they're going to kind of let the market play out, the frenzy, if you will, play out from the 15th through the 17th, see kind of what's there, and then strike? I personally think it's going to be a little bit of both. I'd like to hear your take on it, though.
It is going to be both, I think. Regardless of what they do before next Wednesday, they're going to be busy this week, whether it's looking at who else is getting cut, trying to potentially line up meetings with guys who already have been cut, or something that we're going to talk about later, their own internal negotiations and whatnot. But yeah, I would not be totally shocked if they sign at least one guy who was cut in the past couple of days, if they sign him before the official beginning of free agency. Because just to give everyone a clear timeline, right now every team in the NFL has exclusive negotiating rights with any of their own scheduled unrestricted free agents. They have that until I think Monday at noon. Monday at noon is when the legal tampering period begins, and it's when free agency technically begins because teams can start negotiating and talking with players. But no deal is official until the new league year hits at, I believe, 1600. I don't know if I'm saying military time correctly, but 4 p.m. Eastern time on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. So that's when the official start of free agency happens. But there will be a lot of deals, as we all know, that will be a bit unofficially official before then. And I think if you're the Bengals, again, wide receiver, offensive guard, defensive line, position groups that are being kind of purged right now from rosters, I think you're going to see at least one signing from a street free agent that is going to join the Bengals.
And if I remember correctly from what I read today too, that may be a big part of the equation this time around, meaning going after the guys who have been cut as opposed to those who are set to hit the free agent market, because the Bengals did not receive any compensatory picks, unless I am mistaken. That those were announced today, so they did not get any, and that they usually covet those quite highly. And the fact that what they did in free agency last year played into the formula this year, wherein they didn't get an extra pick. We kind of assumed that was probably going to be the case, but so maybe this year they kind of go after some of those guys who have been more waived, released, that sort of thing, as opposed to set to hit the open market. John, one of your guys that you did on our free agent profile, Taylor Moton, he got the franchise tag. Brandon Scherf, franchise tag 2 years in a row. He's essentially all but off the market. Chris Godwin, a talented wide receiver in Tampa Bay, he got the franchise tag. So while there are a lot of guys that are becoming available, some guys that could really help the Bengals roster are now out of their reach too.
Right. And Scherf and Moden, I think they were objectively like the two most promising names to potentially hit the market. But I mean, guys who are that talented, it's very rare for their original teams to let them go. And that's really why I don't like the franchise tag, because Brandon Scherf, he's going to turn 30 in December, and he's never going to hit free agency. Like that's just kind of detrimental to guys like future earnings, because Brandon Scherf, at the end of the day, like over the past 2 years now, Brandon Scherf's going to like take home like over 30 million in cash like right away. But still, like any long-term like potential future earnings that he might have had, like it's all been evaporated. And you got to think like at this point, like these are his best years, and like, you know, he may only have like 3 or 4 quality years left, so he may never get a long-term extension unless Washington agrees with one before July. And obviously Moden, a couple years younger, you know, people looked at him as like the premier right tackle on the market. And now that he's gone, like, you know, the market is a little bit bare. It's maybe top heavy with 1 or 2 guys, but then there's not a lot of depth after that. So like that was all, those two were always going to be kind of unlikely guys to hit the market. And guys like Tooney and Darrell Williams, you know, weren't expected to be retained at least before free agency began. So those are always going to be like the high end possible options that the Bengals have. But like you mentioned, Kevin Zeitler is now out there. Andrew Norwell for the Jaguars, he's highly speculated to get cut. Trey Turner from the Los Angeles Chargers, he was traded to there last year and had a terrible year, so he's back on the market. Gabe Jackson, who I think we talked about last week, he's still available on the market. That's 2 left guards, I think, or 1 left guard and 3 right guards that have starting quality experience, but no one really knows what their market's going to be. And Andre Parada, good friend of the show, he was on a couple weeks ago, he kind of figured out that like right now there is a void in the guard market between that $5 million range, which is like the low end starter, and like the 10 and above, which is where the Gabe Jacksons and the Trey Turners they originally were. Now those contracts don't exist, but they're not going to get those original deals back on with another team in the next coming weeks or so. So those 3 or 4 guys, they can find themselves in that $6 to $9 million range. And now you're thinking, if you're the Bengals, like, are they going to go after Joe Tooney and pay him $14-15 million a year, or are they going to get a slightly lesser guy in a Gabe Jackson or a reunion of Kevin Zeitler, pay him like half of that in terms of the average annual value, still get a quality player? It kind of seems like with how things are going right now and how the market's getting really saturated, it's almost like a little bit wiser to get a still a quality player for less money, and that gives you more flexibility to fill out the rest of your needs.
And on probably a shorter term deal. I mean, a Joe Tooney, you'd probably be looking at probably a 4 or maybe even a 5-year type of deal. You know, some of these guys that are, you know, maybe a little bit up in age, or guys that were released that you're talking about are in that $6 to $8 million a year range. That's more their wheelhouse in terms of what the Bengals would like to pay that position, especially for a starting guard, one that is pretty good. You know, that to me just I know we all like Joe Tooney and we liked Brandon Scherf, but he's now franchise tag. But I know we like that, but I think, financially, if you can, maybe you're able to get two of those guards. You know what I mean? I mean, there's all kinds of different possibilities there, and that was a very astute observation by Andre Parada. Should have pulled up that tweet there, but you can find him on Twitter and see what we're talking about there. While we're talking about guards, we're gonna transition into a couple of different areas in just a second, including what the salary cap is actually set at, what the Bengals may have to spend, all that kind of good stuff. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But while we're talking about guards, we had a question on it from Frank Randolph talking in the live Facebook chat. How much is Zeitler worth? I mentioned at the onset of the show, Kevin Zeitler has now been released by the Giants. He may be one of those guys in that, given his age. He's I think entering his 10th year. Given his age and him looking for a contract, he may be in that wheelhouse that we're talking about of a little bit more affordability. But I'd like to hear your take on that, as well as how much how likely you think a reunion between Zeitler and the Bengals potentially could be there, because I don't really know. I go back and forth on it.
Yeah, so like that projected range of value that Andre mentioned, like that is still a projection. It's an idea and has a lot of logic behind it, but we don't know for sure what these guys are going to get until they sign the dotted line. Like, unfortunately, there may not be a great market for a guy like Zeitler or a guy like Gabe Jackson. Like, I think Zeitler still would have a lot of interest around the league because he's just a quality player and he's durable and all that stuff. And I think you could still expect, probably at least 2 more good years out of him. So maybe he does get into that $7 million range. But if there doesn't happen to be a market for some of these guys, it could just be a 1 year, $4 to $5 million deal, because unfortunately, money's tight right now. So, we don't know for sure what these guys are worth until teams start making these offers. But that, I still think that $6 to $8 million range makes a lot of sense, at least for a 2-year deal. Maybe a guy would take a little bit less, more money up front, more cash up front, but maybe like a smaller cap hit for just a 1-year deal to then, play well and then enter the market next year when the cap is a little bit higher.
So that good segue there, John. Let's talk about the cap, because that finally, that news and that information became available on Wednesday. You wrote up the post on cincyjungle.com. Salary cap is set at $182.5 million. Quite a dramatic drop from last year. And I love your caption here. How much do the Bengals have to spend? And you said the answer is still a lot. So you wrote this bad boy here. Can you run us through a little bit of an overview? I know we talked quite a bit about it with Andre a couple of weeks ago, but now that we have some official numbers here, can you run us through a couple of these, not to put you on the spot?
Right. So the final number was projected to be somewhere between 180, 185. 180 was the new floor that they agreed upon, the NFL agreed upon in February. It ended up being right in the middle of those two projected values. And what does that mean for the Bengals? Well, the Bengals originally had, I believe, $10.8 million in rollover cap space from the 2020 season. So that gets added to their cap number. So 182.5 plus 10.8, it's like 193. But then there were some things where they adjusted for incentives that haven't been met. So they added on like an additional $2 million for the Bengals rollover. So the Bengals cap number, their adjusted cap number is like 195. And then you look at, their top 51 contracts. I think they have exactly 51 contracts until the Brandon Allen deal. Bengals signed Brandon Allen. Yeah. So once the Brandon Allen deal gets in, that'll affect the cap number a little bit. But Bengals top 51 cap hits right now is right at about 150, and then they're still carrying like $2.5 million from the Carlos Dunlap signing bonus because that's still dead money. So total cap space right now, currently as of Wednesday, March 10th for the Bengals is just under $43 million, which is I think 5th amongst NFL teams right now.
Yeah, they've got a lot to spend there. I know they have the most in the AFC North in terms of cap space at the current time. So go give this a read. All the data points there that John brought up is on this post on cincyjungle.com. But that's kind of where we're at with things with the Cincinnati Bengals in terms of their space currently and where the cap is set. Now, the Bengals, a lot of teams have not a lot of teams have been shedding players from their roster to make space because they're in a different salary cap situation. The Bengals have not done that yet, but we know that the Bengals can save quite a bit of money, anywhere from $9 million to $11 million or so, with Geno Atkins being released, depending on the post June 1st designation. We've got Bobby Hart, some potential savings there, especially if the Bengals go after some of this slew of offensive linemen that have hit the market. So there's some savings there, and there are a couple of other names that they can really, maybe trim some fat if they really want to go after some of these guys. But, I've seen you say it. I know Andre said it. I've said it. And I know our bud Chris Rolling over at Bengals Wire has said this as well. There's really not a reason why the Bengals can't get a small handful, at least, of some high-quality starters, some relatively to high-priced veterans to really help out this roster at this point in time.
Yeah, BJ Finney is not going to be the only guy that they cut dead weight. Like, I know people are considering maybe like they hold on to Geno and Bobby for now, but like they don't need the cap space just yet. As soon as they do, like, they may have respect for both of those guys, specifically Geno, because of what he's done for the past decade. But that is space that they are well aware that they can create. And whenever they need that space, and in all likelihood they are going to need that space, those guys are going to unfortunately be looking for new teams to play for.
Well, I'm gonna throw my co-host a little bit of a curveball here, because we're gonna talk about a couple of press conferences here that were held by the Cincinnati Bengals and a couple of their major figureheads. I want to talk just a few minutes about what was said there. We have a soundbite of the week. I was going to play it later, but I think this plays in pretty well to what we're talking about. So with John, if you're okay with it, I'm going to play our soundbite of the week and tie it in right now. This is Zach Taylor talking to the media. I think it was a question asked by ESPN's Ben Baby, friend of our program, talking about some offensive line questions. So I'm going to play you this, and give me 1 second. I will cue this up. Basically, there's been some questions about where, if the Bengals invest on the offensive line, does that mean some shuffling of some players that are set to be on that offensive line in 21 and start for them? Will they be moved around? That was kind of the question. And in case you did not hear the press conference, here's a small snippet of what Zach Taylor had to say. And oh, by the way, it was an echoing of what Duke Tobin said a day prior. So here it is.
Zach, Duke hinted that Jonah Williams, asked about left tackle. He said Jonah Williams was a guy that they saw flashes of, that y'all saw flashes of, that can be there moving forward. Regardless of what happens at the draft, do you plan on keeping Jonah at left tackle?
Yes, I thought he made a lot of improvement in the games that he got to play last year. Again, everybody's got to be flexible with what pieces are available to you. And so you can never say anything set in stone, but I'm very comfortable with Jonah at left tackle. I think he made some really solid improvements there from game to game, and we're excited to get back there at that piece next year.
John, surprised, not surprised, agree, disagree? That is our soundbite of the week. Zach Taylor talking about the commitment to Jonah Williams at left tackle, echoing the sentiments by Duke Tobin made a day earlier. What do you think about that?
I mean, I could give my own opinion, but I feel like Matt Minnick, our own Matt Minnick, said it best. Like, the Bengals don't need to create more problems on the offense line than they already have. And I think moving Jonah around, unless they fully commit to it, like right now, I feel like that just creates an unnecessary problem. Jonah was a good left tackle last year, especially for one who played in the NFL for the first time in his career. He was objectively above average and good. I know he had some mishaps in here and there. That's just what happens with young offense line. We've talked about this ad nauseum, it feels like, but he was good, and the Bengals recognized that. And I feel like they want to move around as little pieces as possible. And I feel like keeping Jonah where he was good at last year, I think that makes a lot of sense, regardless of anything else that they do.
So, question for you here. A recent rookie and a name that has been linked to the Bengals, either at number 5 or if they move back, blew up a workout this week. Rashawn Slater. Okay. Go look at the numbers. He did exceptionally well. He tested very well in a number of different areas. My question to you, John Sheeran, Jonah Williams, the criticism with him, short arm length, 34 inches or so, maybe a little bit under. Rashawn Slater, for all the measurables, 33-inch arms, short arms. So now you've got potentially your bookend tackles, both of them with short arms, in the AFC North with a slew of different pass rushers, big ones and more tweener, linebacker, edge type guys. I mean, all kinds of different guys coming off the edge that they have to fend off. Just a quick topic of conversation: Rashawn Slater. How does that figure in with the short arm length with Jonah Williams and their commitment to him on the left side?
I feel like Slater, if you want to compare Slater and Williams as prospects, I think Slater not only is a little bit stronger, but he's definitely a lot quicker and just a better athlete. And that's why ultimately Rashawn Slater, if he stays at left tackle or just one of the tackle spots, he's going to be fine. Like the athleticism is so underrated as an attribute for just offensive tackles in general, because you need to get out in space and you need to be able to handle these guys who run 4.4s and 4.3s off the edge nowadays. And he has that speed and explosion to get out in the stance and limit some of these guys. And that's how you can counter having less than ideal length. And guys have survived with 33-inch arms because either they are just expert technicians like Joe Thomas, or just also like Joe Thomas, supreme athletes for their size. And I think Rashawn Slater definitely qualifies as a supreme athlete for his size, but he can also move inside the guard, but because he's definitely strong enough, and that athleticism will also translate. He's going to be fine wherever he goes. And I don't even know if that is the case for Jonah Williams, who is a slightly more limited athlete, but definitely has a little bit more issues with strength too. And that would definitely impede how successful he could be at guard unless he puts on a lot more strength. And who knows if that's even in his best interest if he doesn't have the frame to really max that out.
Your comfort level, though, of if that was pick with the Bengals, you would be comfortable because of the said athleticism. If the Bengals were to go with two shorter arm tackles on both edges, you would be fine with that.
I think with Slater, like right now, I don't see why he wouldn't be like a multi-Pro Bowl guard. And if he stays at tackle, he could be like an Isaiah Wynn, just an above average solid starter at tackle. Yeah, like I feel like that's a great comparison for him. I think they would be fine. Like I still like it's not ideal, but if you're betting on a guy with those measurables, I think Slater is a good bet to make.
I agree with you. There is a level of discomfort for me with both of them having that same issue, but I liked what I saw out of his workout. And, I've had Sewell as my top tackle. I know some have Slater as their top tackle. Some even have Darisaw up there as well. I still think I have Sewell by a tiny bit there, but I did like what I saw in terms of workouts and whatnot from Slater. It was pretty impressive. So good for him. He's only helping himself, which is nice. I think we'll all be very interested to see Sewell's measurements, workouts, etc. when that comes out as well, because we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Let's end this segment, the kind of news and free agency update segment, if you will, on what the Bengals opted not to do in free agency. The Bengals opted not to give a franchise tag designation to either William Jackson or Carl Lawson. A lot of people thought Carl Lawson was going to get it, potentially William Jackson, just because he's a high-level corner, but the Bengals opted not to do that. It surprised some. It didn't surprise others. It disappointed some. It actually made sense to some others. Your feelings on it, because I've got some as well.
I don't think there was a single person out there who identifies as a Bengals fan that would have said their ideal offseason involved the franchise tag being used. It's exactly what we talked about with Andre when we ran down his ideal offseason program. Like the franchise tag, it limits. It does exactly what the Bengals said it did. Like the fact that they didn't use it allows them to be more flexible with what they can do. The franchise tag, like I don't like it. I've already said this before, but it usually ends in one of two ways after a year. Either A, the player gets tagged again, a la Brandon Scherf, or B, the player leaves. Like the odds of them reaching, of any player reaching a deal by the July 15th deadline, it doesn't always happen. It's definitely not a guarantee. It's far from a certainty. More times than not, those guys just play on that tag, and teams really only tag players because they're just so far apart in their negotiations and what they value them as. Like that's ultimately why teams tag players, because like they know that they're not going to be willing to, pay them a competitive offer, and they just control the rights for another year, and they give them a high price tag, but also a high cap number as well. So the tag is not something that you want to use. And it's especially not for a guy who's 26 years old and Carl Lawson is only ascending as a player. Like that would not have been the smart thing to do. But of course, everybody only looks at things at face value and thinks, oh, the Bengals didn't tag Carl Lawson, they're definitely going to lose him. Like, I think if you've been reading what has been said, what we've been saying, what's being reported, you would know that there's probably a reason why the Bengals didn't tag Carl Lawson. Like our friend James Rapine reported a couple weeks ago that the Bengals were willing to use the tag on Carl Lawson. That should indicate to you that they definitely value him as a guy that they want to keep around and they want to keep the talks going. And they definitely value him a little bit more than William Jackson at this point, because there has been no talks about them ever using the franchise tag of William Jackson. And there have been rumors over the past year about maybe them just moving on in general. But the Bengals still definitely value Carl Lawson, would like to keep him around. That's exactly what Ian Rappaport and Tyler Dragon both said after the Bengals declined to use the franchise tag, that they want to keep those talks going and they would like Carl Lawson to come back to Cincinnati. I don't think, and I think Jay Morrison said this on the Athletic podcast, I don't think the Bengals declined the tag with Lawson if they didn't think that they were relatively close on reaching a new deal. And like we talked about, they have until Monday afternoon to get that new deal done before Lawson can look at other offers. And if by that time comes, if there isn't a deal that happens, Lawson is definitely going to look at other offers, and the Bengals may still make a competitive one, but he's definitely going to entertain others. And all it takes is one team to offer a little bit more money up front, a little bit more money down the road, and he's probably going to take that. So I didn't understand the whole outrage over the Bengals not using the tag. It's not what they should have done. I think if by Monday, if they still haven't signed him, then I think then we can just assume that Carl Lawson's gone. But in my opinion, he's coming back until he doesn't, because I think there is still definitely interest there. And I think there's a reason why they didn't use the tag in the first place.
So I'm going to say this. I had said a couple of times that an ideal situation would be that they long-term tag or they long-term contract one of these two and franchise tag one of them. Now, I said that not because I like the idea of the franchise tag and because I like the idea of that upfront money and that immediate hit on the cap. I don't. Why I said that is because I think this team, to eliminate roster holes, needs to keep those guys. And by appearances and accounts, it sounds like they may be far apart on some things, and that tag would need to be used in order for them to be able to keep both of them for at least 21. That's a sentiment I had. I don't really like the tag in general for the reasons that you just specified, for the reasons that Andre Parada specified. So, in ideals, of course, it's keep both of them and sign them kind of long-term, nice manageable cap hit, and you maintain some very good players on your roster potentially, and then you're entering the draft and other parts of free agency in a much better position. I was not up in arms that the Bengals did not use the franchise tag personally. I do think there's a lot of risk there, but I think the Bengals played it right, John, because as we see which players were not tagged very heavily in the as we go into free agency here, not a lot of edge players. I mean, Shaq Barrett not getting a franchise tag, that's a big deal. So, so all of a sudden there's a little bit, kind of like the guard market, there's a little bit of a saturation of these positions. Not a lot of corners got tagged either. So that's not to say that these guys won't be coveted. They obviously will by a lot of teams, but the Bengals maybe played it a little smart, financially speaking, by not going that route with either one of these players.
And I know people are mentioning that he posted his guns are for hire, like an Instagram post. And I remember he posted something about he tweeted something out right as the tag window opened, oh, he's getting tagged, and obviously he wasn't tagged. I don't read into much of what these guys say. They have their own personalities, and that's just how they want to brand themselves. I don't think it has any real bearing on what's actually happening. But again, going back to this, because I know that losing Jackson and Lawson on the surface looks a lot like losing both Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu in the same offseason. Looks like losing Andrew Whitworth and Kevin Zeitler in the same offseason. The Bengals are not. All right, those decisions were bad. And they were bad, especially because they didn't do a good job of replacing those guys. They had in-house replacements that they tried to use, and obviously it failed tremendously. And they didn't supplement those losses with quality additions. The Bengals at this point, if you've been reading anything that they've said, they know the pass rush sucks, and they know that even with Carl Lawson there, it stunk. That's not something that they're just ignoring, and they're just willing to let it get worse by letting Carl Lawson go. Again, if he leaves. And William Jackson also leaves, it creates a problem. But I think the Bengals are in a better position to address that problem, and they have more aggressiveness and more of a mindset to actually legitimately address that problem. Because if they don't re-sign Carl Lawson, they still have $43 million in cap space, and there are still names on the market that they can sign to compensate for that loss. I think if they don't come to an agreement with Lawson, it's not going to be they sit on their hands, maybe draft like a guy in the 4th round and hope for the best, and maybe hope for Khalid Kareem to develop. I think they're going to be more aggressive in trying to replace Lawson's production more so than what they did in years past with Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and Whitworth and Zeitler.
I think they probably set their sights on Barrett at that point if he's not already scooped up. I mean, I think that's and I don't know how willing he is to come back based on that whole situation that transpired a couple of off seasons ago when Zach Taylor, Lou Anarumo came in here. Speaking of those guys, John, the thing is too that strikes me about this, and I know they've said they want Carl Lawson back. It's been pretty quiet in terms of William Jackson. There's maybe been a couple of things that they've said that, note that they want to have him back. But it's very, very clear. Zach Taylor, Lou Anarumo, and they're showing Marvin Lewis guys out of this building. I mean, they are not keeping those guys around now. For better or worse, some of those guys can still be productive, like the two we're talking about. But we don't know how much Lou Anarumo actually really likes these guys for his defense. He may just want different looks all around there off the edge. But you lose Carl Lawson, you lose William Jackson. Those two position groups become very, very thin, regardless of how much or how little Lou Anarumo likes them in his defense.
There is no better conversation with that than with William Jackson. Like 2020 was not like it was still a solid year for him, but obviously 2019 was a vast disappointment, and there were some injuries as well with that. But it just seemed like ever since Lou came in here, like William wasn't necessarily happy. He just wasn't playing up to what we thought he could be. It's just I guess just not a good fit. And at this point, there just seems to be enough smoke in regards to just him just not really wanting to be here. And if he doesn't want to be here, and if he's not fully happy here and he can make more money elsewhere, then there's no reason to hold on to him for the sake of just holding on to him. Like that would only create another potential Carlos Dunlap situation. So I think as soon as Trey Waynes was signed last year, it kind of told us all we need to know about how they feel about William Jackson with this current regime. And yeah, like if he's gone, then all you have left is Darius Phillips, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed. But again, with no franchise tag, you still have flexibility to do that, and there's always the draft as well.
We'll see what happens with these two. I'm not, as we sit here today, I don't want to sit here and say, oh, both are gone. I would be very surprised if both are back.
Both aren't coming back.
Yeah, I don't think both are coming back. And I think the Bengals probably are working harder to keep Carl Lawson than William Jackson if I'm just sitting here and playing the guessing game at this point and trying to read the tea leaves. That's just what it seems like at this point. But they opted not to use the franchise tag on either of them. We're going to get to our State Your Case segment in just a second, as well as a free agency profile. Before we do, first of all, there are a lot of people joining us live tonight, more so than there's been since a little while here. So hello to everybody joining us live, whether it's on the Facebook feed of Cincy Jungle's Facebook feed, whether it's on our YouTube channel. Thank you. Make sure you hit subscribe there. There's a little logo right under John's left shoulder. So click that and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Get all of our content there. We're also streaming live on our Twitter account as well as Cincy Jungle's Twitter account. So however you're joining us, thank you for joining us live. And if you cannot join us live, you're missing out. But I'm glad that you are still downloading us on your favorite audio platform or catching us on our YouTube channel afterwards or on Cincy Jungle, wherever. We appreciate all of the support that you're showing this program. We've got a fun announcement towards the end of the show as well.
So Anthony kind of had his own little like subliminal State Your Case without really announcing it, but it was like the Bengals were smart to not franchise tag Carl Lawson and William Jackson. We got 2 State Your Cases for tonight because we're jam-packed and we're going through this really quickly. So let's get to this other one. There was a conversation that kind of sparked up on Twitter earlier this week about the whole left tackle versus right tackle debate. I think it's a very archaic one. If by now in 2021 you don't feel like right tackles are just as valuable or just as important as left tackles, I'm not sure how much you can be helped. The Bengals specifically face TJ Watt twice a year. They face Myles Garrett twice a year. And I think this year alone, they're going to face Khalil Mack, Zadarius Smith for the Packers, Joey Bosa again for the Chargers. I think they play the AFC West. Like they're going to face a lot of trouble. And the fact that we've seen Bobby Hart play right tackle for them for the last 3 years, I feel like if you don't know about that right tackle is important by now, then I think it's all just kind of lost on you. But also in the past week, there's been a little bit more smoke about the Bengals kind of being locked in, if you will, quotation marks, on Penei Sewell. Maybe he's like their top target in the draft right now. I think Matt Miller said it for the Draft Scout. I know the Inquirer, Tyler Dragon, has alluded to that as well. There's just, and it makes sense, it's logical, but we're now hearing some actual reports and actual legitimate smoke on him being the guy if he's there. And then they came to the discussion about if they draft Sewell, where do you play him? And my state your case is you play him at right tackle because of the reasons that we previously discussed with Jonah Williams. Jonah Williams is a natural left tackle. If you go back to the last 6 years that Jonah Williams has played football, going back to his junior year of high school, if you go back to Penei Sewell's junior year of high school, here is where they played. Jonah Williams has played 5 years at left tackle since his junior year of high school. This 1 year at right tackle was his freshman year at Alabama. It's because they had Cam Robinson there. It's because it's Alabama. And he moved over to left tackle, his natural position where he was with high school, where he was at high school, where he has been ever since Cincinnati drafted him. They drafted him to be a left tackle. There was no hesitation with that. They said we view him as a left tackle. That's where he's been. That's where he's trained. That's where he's practiced. That's where he's natural at. Penei Sewell, since his junior year of high school, he's played 2 years at right tackle, 2 years at left tackle at Oregon. Obviously, being 6'6", 330, and a ball of athleticism, the natural perception is you play that guy at left tackle to be the blindside blocker. In high school, Penei Sewell was a right tackle. We talked about this, I believe, during the season with Matt Minnick, that was his position in high school. He played on the defensive line as well. I don't think his high school was very big. They didn't have a lot of players on the team, but he was a right tackle, and he was just as athletic back then as he is now for his size. Penei Sewell is a natural right tackle. He just happened to play left tackle at Oregon because that's where they decided to play him. And then this whole thing has been, oh yeah, the Bengals should just move Jonah Williams out of left tackle and play the better player at left tackle. Again, like right tackle is, if it's not more important, it's equally as important as left tackle nowadays. Like you need two solid guys, and I don't see the point in moving the guy who has been a natural left tackle for his entire career to just appease the rookie that you're drafting at 5th overall. Penei Sewell hasn't played football in a year. He doesn't have another year left tackle experience. He's been training to play both sides because he doesn't know where he's going to end up. He doesn't know what position he's going to play. He's had a year of training at both left and right tackle with the technique and the kick slides, and he's ready to do whatever. And right now, the Bengals need a right tackle and left tackle.
Man, these are supposed to be contentious, dude, and I
feel like we're more contentious with maybe the listeners and maybe just the fan base in general because we just kind of mind meld these.
Yeah, it's us versus them. That's funny. But no, yeah, I agree with you, man. I agree with you. And I mean, could he come in and play left tackle? Sure. I mean, you could go that route, but I think as we've seen what has been preached and why these coaches are coming back for a third season and why they are dead set on Jonah Williams playing left tackle, they want stability. They want stability at key places, whether it's on the staff or whether it's on the roster. They want stability on this team, and they think that that's going to be the key for them to take the next step in 2021. That's going to be what they feel that's going to be the key for them to push towards the playoffs this year, along with making a lot of different acquisitions in free agency and doing the right things in the draft. I think that Sewell, I think as not only is a rookie, he's a young rookie. So I think placing him at right tackle is the better move. And like you said, he's had some experience on that side of the ball. And if we had seen some really, really concerning things from Jonah Williams at left tackle this year, or we had a full rookie year where there were struggles and then there was this year to follow that, then I can sit here and say, well, I understand now the rationale of potentially moving Jonah Williams around, but we don't have a lot of sample size, and the sample size that we had was okay. It was pretty good at times. It was okay. And he still is growing as a pro as well because he missed his rookie season. So you have to figure he's going to only improve at the left tackle position. You've got a young, athletic right tackle and Sewell potentially coming in. So yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with this one, man. I think that should be an initial alignment, and then until Jonah gives you real reasons to believe that he is incapable of holding down that left tackle position, that's maybe when you make the switch over, and or you feel that Sewell is becoming just too immense of a player and he's just a better fit on the left side for you. That's when you make that move. I don't think you just automatically yank things around when you draft this kid.
And anytime someone says that right tackles aren't as important as left tackles, you are devaluing Willie Anderson's Hall of Fame case. Like that's on you. That's on you. All right. But yeah, like if you don't have two quality guys as your bookends, that's a hole that can be exploited, and it was exploited last year. Jonah Williams was solid for most of the year. I know he had a couple of bad games in there, but he definitely had more quality games than Bobby Hart. And unfortunately, like the blindside perception, it has forced defenses to essentially maximize that advantage against right tackles. If you're going to play your best pass blocking tackle at left tackle, then go up against the guy that's mainly dutied for run blocking. That's why we've seen a surge in guys that are going up against the right tackle as the best pass rushers in the league. Von Bell, Khalil Mack, Cameron Jordan, like I believe Joey Bosa as well, like Myles Garrett for the most part, TJ Watt, like the best pass rushers in the league, they almost exclusively rush against right tackles because defenses have to adjust. If that's where the best advantage is until offenses catch up, that's how it's going to continue to be. So you need two quality pass blocking tackles. And I think for all those reasons, like Sewell was just better suited for a tackle right now.
That's, I wish I could argue with, man. Like I said, I wish I could argue with you here, but that's a great take and a great state your case there. And I think, I think that it sounds like, based on what Duke Tobin said earlier this week and what Zach Taylor said this week, it sounds as if that'll probably, if they go that route, it sounds as if that's going to be the plan. Because if you heard our soundbite of the week, I mean, they're pretty committed to Jonah Williams. Now, words are what words are, but and coach speak is what it is. But at this point, you have your opinion on this, John. Do you think that the Bengals stick to if Sewell is the pick, do you believe that they would stick to their word at this point, or do you think that they would just be overly enamored with the kid and say, hey, go left side and we'll move Jonah right?
I suppose it's possible. I obviously don't think it's the best move that they could do, but again, like Jonah's still a guy that's been in the league for 2 years. He's only played one, but he's been in the league. He's been in an NFL weight room for 2 years, and like Duke Tobin even said, like he was asked about some of these prospects that opted out, and like there's a level of there's a increased level of projection that you don't normally see for guys that have played 3 years. And, that is a question mark. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't think highly of the guys that opted out. It's just like that's just projecting because they don't have recent film on them. They don't know for sure until they meet and talk with them, like what they've been doing for the past year. So, yeah, I think it's just kind of silly to just assume that just because Sewell is this label as this generational guy that played left tackle, that they would change all of their plans and just move a quality young left tackle to right tackle when it may not even suit him best. So, yeah, I think even with Sewell, for how highly touted he is and how highly they may think of him, I think they would still stick to their guns there.
I think this is in reference to Penei Sewell. David Adcock in the live Facebook chat says his tapes definitely show him getting on the second level. That's for sure. Sewell, there's a lot of second level and attacking some players that are a little bit smaller than him, but that's a good thing because they need to get some, especially in the run game, they need to get some space opened up to be able to be a bit more explosive in the run game and just be a bit more versatile and do the things that they want to do on offense. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. That's a good state your case here. By the way, before we get to the free agent profile that we're going to give you here to close out the show, I don't know if this comment is relevant, but I just saw the name of this person in our live YouTube chat, Coach Dan Kneecaps Campbell. I found that to be one of the better names I've seen in one of our live chats there. So kudos, Kneecaps, head coach Kneecaps, Dan Campbell. Kudos. What do we got for the free agent profile this week, John?
So last week we went with Shaq Barrett. We've gone with some high profile guys, I believe. You did Kenny Galladay a couple weeks ago as well. We're gonna go a little bit under the radar, but a guy that could potentially make a little bit more than what we originally thought. Roy Robertson Harris out of the Chicago Bears. There's quietly a decent amount of 2020 Bears that are hitting the market that should intrigue the Bengals. I think Robertson Harris was a guy that was brought up by Malik Wright, who's a Bengals insider that everyone should be following. Joe Goodberry as well. A guy who's just 27 years old. He's going to turn 28 in July. He's had, I think, 4 years of playing experience with the Bears. He's dealt with some injuries. I believe he ended the 2020 season on IR after playing just 8 games. Did not record a sack last year, but I think as a guy who played sparingly as like a rotational guy for the past 4 years with the Bears. Again, Bears, a stacked defense, a stacked defensive line, not a lot of opportunities to really break through in there, but a guy who was an undrafted free agent out of UTEP from 2016. He's just kept with the Bears for the past 4 years. I believe in January, either him or his significant other post on Instagram that like they're essentially not coming back to Chicago, so he is going to hit the market and he's going to test other offers. But guy who's 6'7", like almost 300 pounds, and the line's mainly at like the 3 tech or 4-eye, as a guy who can kind of move inside, but also has the length and the size to play on the edge. I think the Bengals aren't going to really solve their pass rushing issues like immediately this offseason. I think they're going to throw a handful of pieces at the puzzle to try to just minimize the damage as it is right now, and just kind of just hastily throw something together. And I think Robertson Harris is a versatile piece that can push the pocket and can win as a pass rusher, can also hold his own in the run game as well. Just as a guy with upside who hasn't really hit his peak just yet, but I think teams really like his athleticism and his size. I think he was just given the go-ahead by doctors so he was placed on injury reserve with a shoulder injury back in November, and he was just given the green light that he's going to be completely ready to do whatever he needs to do in the offseason. But a guy with versatility, guy with size, only 27 years old, and I mean, we don't know what he's going to get on the market, but teams could view him as a high upside guy and may give him a slightly more expensive deal than maybe just like a prove-it deal. So I think that fits the Bengals a lot because they're not taking a proven guy that's going to get a ton of money on the market, but they could slightly overpay, I guess, for what he's already done in the hopes that he, I guess, kind of earns that value with increased playing time and increased opportunities. But again, they may not throw money at a Shaq Barrett or an elite guy to try to solve all their problems with just one player and potentially replacing Carl Lawson. I think it might just be like maybe 1 or 2 defensive linemen, maybe a guy in the draft to try to solve those issues altogether. And I think Robertson Harris is a guy that we need to remember next week.
This is a guy where, and I think I just channeled my inner Chris
Collinsworth on the show.
Here's a guy. No, this is a guy that I think really fits what Lou Anarumo really wants to be up front, which is multiple, and you can switch guys around, you can switch formations, and you know, if he gets a player like this is kind of where you say, okay, coach, you want this guy. Let's hope everyone's healthy. Now you've got quote unquote your guys. Can you make it work, make it happen, because you have this grand plan that you've been trying to execute going on the 3rd year now. And, you've got some players that you feel you can move around and do different things like this young man here. And, I just feel that this is a piece that would kind of almost, Lou Anarumo may put his reputation on a little bit, even though he's not a high price guy. It's kind of like one of those guys that he would probably really pound the table for his defense. And so, I like the player. You look at the numbers, there's nothing that pops out. Like you said, I think he was a victim a little bit, not only of injury, but being behind a very talented, while being in the mix of some very talented Bears players. So, I like the idea here. And this is kind of one of those guys, John, where when you look at what you bring him in, and I think, fans would sit here and go, okay, well, that doesn't really move the needle that much in terms of a name or, maybe even a sizable contract, that sort of thing. But this is a player when you look back at some of those like nice free agent signings where you go, oh, that was like a Wallace Gilberry, not the same type of player, but you bring a guy like that in and you feel like, you kind of get him on maybe a reasonable, nothing big type of deal. And they come in and they hopefully play well in your system. And then all of a sudden you kind of found this diamond in the rough a little bit that fits your defense pretty well. And I think this kid has the potential for that. Exactly.
And I kind of feel like the logic with like Trey Waynes last year, where like on the outside, it may feel like they overpaid, but I feel like the Bengals may have thought that they could get more out of Trey Waynes than what he already was in Minnesota. And I feel like this is a very similar situation. I think Mike Garafolo on Twitter mentioned that like he could get more money than what is expected that he's expected to make on the open market. Just if he just has that market, if he has that intrigue from teams around the league, if they like his pedigree, if they like his overall profile, he could get more than what he's projected. I think PFF projected him like in that $4 to $3 million range for like 1 or 2 years. Like he could get significantly more than that, even in a year where the cap is tight. Like, if teams view him as a rare talent that's hitting the market, then he could end up with that deal. But I feel like the Bengals could pounce on an opportunity and recognize a guy that has a lot more potential than what he already showed again in a talented defense. And now that he's finally healthy, it'd be interesting to see if he kind of hits the stride in a new scheme.
So here, just quickly before we close it up and we get on out of here, here's just a looking at Pro Football Reference here, looking at some of his stats. And again, nothing that pops out to you quite so much. I mean, small handful of sacks over the course of 3 seasons, injury cut last year short for him, as you mentioned. But really kind of, you can see started to hit his stride, especially with some starts towards the last couple of years, but 2 sacks, 3 sacks, 2.5 sacks, topped out at 30 total tackles in 2019. 22 of them were solo, has 9 tackles for loss over the course of 4 seasons. And then you see here, though, John, this is intriguing to me here as a movable piece. The 21 quarterback hits from 2018 and 2019. That's not a bad number right there.
Mind you, he only played 1 season over 500 snaps. He's averaging about like 400, 300 snaps a year because of how stacked that defensive line was.
Yep. Good call. Good profile. That is this week's free agency profile. We kind of started with a little bit more of the obvious and kind of looking more at some names that might be a little bit under the radar. And we went with Roy Robertson Harris of the Chicago Bears. Tall guy, big guy, and seems to be a movable piece in the defense. Before we get on out of here, we got to drop the mic and give some final thoughts, I suppose. John, what do you have for us before we bounce on out of here this Wednesday evening? When the kind of our free agency eve, I guess. A little bit.
I feel like I always steal, or I sometimes steal your mic drops. I want to give the floor to you just so that doesn't happen this time. In case it does happen.
Okay. I've got a couple. Number one is that first of all, thanks to Richard Dalton for joining us on the Monday water cooler chat there. Good guy. He's the guy who created the logo. So go to @DaltonSignature if you need some graphic design work. Great guy, Bengals fan. The other, I kind of teased it a little bit. We have we're working on hammering a time down, but we have a Hall of Fame type name joining us. I won't say who yet, but a Hall of Fame type name of a former Bengals player that'll be joining us on the podcast in the very near future. So we are excited about that. And John, amongst the myriad of really nice comments I've kind of seen flash by us in the live chats, I want to share this one because this really nice comment by Dubs Bengals @Daniel Dubs. I listened to the Bengals pods and yours is great. It's impressive to be so positive after hearing your sister's story during the COVID lockdown. It really shows you're all in. You typically don't judge what the Bengals do and you stand behind your player evals. I first of all, I mean, some of that was specifically pointed to me, but I took that as a compliment to both of us, John, and our podcast and what we do here. And, unfortunately, there were a couple of episodes where we got pretty serious just based on everything that was going on about a year or a little less ago. But I thought that was a really nice comment and a nice compliment about our show and what we try and do. It's a labor of love. And, anytime we get a nice comment like that, I had to give some public recognition. So thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. I mean, sometimes we go back and forth with our listeners, but we love all of you the same, and we love the passion that you guys bring for this show, and you ultimately you guys drive it, and we want to keep doing it. A show that you are proud of and you want to listen to every week. My mic drop is going to be about a Twitter account that Anthony mentioned earlier this week, Obscure Bengals, which is something that really caught my eye, and I think it only started this month, and I was waiting for him or her, whoever is running the account, to name drop this certain player, and it happened today. Maurice Purify. Maurice Purify. If you guys don't know, back in 2009, which I think the year that Maurice Purify was with the Cincinnati Bengals, little 13-year-old John went down to Georgetown, Kentucky for like 2 days at training camp. like my friend's dad was there and he was asking me like, oh, who really stood out to you in practice? And I said, you know what? Maurice Purify made some good catches in training camp. He had some nice little deep catches down the sideline. They all laughed at me because Maurice Purify was not going to do anything for the Cincinnati Bengals or any NFL team in particular. And of course, he ended up not lasting long in the NFL. But a few years later, Arizona Rattlers, Arena Football League. Maurice Purify had like 140 touchdowns in a single season and was like the MVP of the league. 13-year-old John, Arena Football League scout extraordinaire. Shout out to Obscure Bengals.
Soothsayer. That's a great one. I thought of you. I think recently they did an Armand Benz. That was one they did, and then I think I don't know if this one's come up yet, but remember Mario Urrutia? Do you remember that name? I think he's from another big receiver guy, kind of like Purify, big guy that you had hopes for and just it never happened. But that's funny. Yeah, good account though. Good account. So I pride myself on knowing a lot of little names and whatnot of old Bengals players, and sometimes he or she brought up a couple that I was like, wow, okay, that's really digging in the archives there, dusting off the books. That's good stuff. We're going to hop on out of here. Before we do, John, you and Matt Minnick are taking the air tomorrow. I may join you. I don't know. But you and Matt Minnick are taking the air tomorrow for a little free agency special as well. Am I correct?
That's right. We're going to go down through the current roster and talk about some of the things that they did and didn't do this week and where it stands and kind of like what they need to do, sort of like an overview of a plan, like where they are right now, where they need to go. But always nice to collab with Matt and really talk to him because he offers perspectives that sometimes we don't, and it ends up being really good. So definitely check that out tomorrow night.
Yeah, please do. We're gonna bring you that one. We're gonna bring you at least whether it's this week or next week, at least one Listener Questions Live episode on a Friday. So check that out. And we're gonna be slamming you with stuff next week as free agency hits, whether it's just short updates, longer shows, all kinds of breakdowns of what the Bengals did do, didn't do, all of that. So join us for that. We've got a lot to talk about. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks for tuning in to the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We'll see you soon.